Meeting to order because we have a pretty full meeting, and we've dutifully figured out the composition of the committee after changes in commission leadership as well as over on the PIVA side. So welcome, Kate, to the audit committee over here and to the commission. I guess this is your first commission-related activity, so welcome you to that as well. I know you'll be in our broader ones. We have the agenda's been posted. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda as proposed?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Next, first item of business is approval of minutes from February 26th and April 22nd. These were posted when Sunday? Saturday? When were we looking at these? I know I was a little late getting them back to you.
So some of the first set went out on Friday night. And then I sent a revision on, yeah. So Ed, I don't know if you want to take a few minutes. I assume you'll abstain since you weren't in attendance. So Ed, if you want a minute to, yeah.
Okay.
And then the second set, there are two sets of minutes in there. There's April 22nd ones as well. So can I get a motion to approve the minutes? And I'll second. All in favor? Aye. And one abstention for the record. Yeah.
Thank you.
Next item be the Commissioner Code of Ethics. This is an item that's been on several agendas.
Just one other item.
Oh.
You moving quick too.
Oh, okay.
Appreciate that.
Audit committee follow-up. Okay.
Okay, so that's the page in your agenda. So basically we have 6 open items. I'll go through them really quickly. The AC, the audit committee self-evaluation, that was due to be performed June 2014, but we're pushing it back to this meeting, so that actually will happen later on the agenda. We have that occurring, so that we hope that should close out Then from there was another open item, which I think is closed, but I needed the audit committee to tell me that they were satisfied. There was a motion back in September of last year to obtain legal counsel, external legal counsels in the review and assessment of compliance policies. And I know there were some offline discussions. I just needed to make sure that the audit committee was comfortable with removing this and closing this out to a closed status. So that was around the policies and procedures that we were putting in place for a lot of the compliance policies. We met with, I guess, the external legal counsel, and there were some other things, I guess, related to Commissioner Code of Ethics. This was an executive session, so that's why I'm kind of dancing around it, but there were some other items. And if we want, we can talk about this in the executive session.
I think we should before we close it out.
Okay, all right, so we'll talk about that in the executive session. Then we had the review of the IA service provider procurement policy from the 226 meeting. We asked that feedback be given within 10 days. I think I got one person to say that it was okay. That was it. Did you, I think?
That what?
Oh, Travis may have responded. Yeah. But there's a policy, and I included it again in the back of your packets. It's the service provider policy that we established for how we handle procurement of external service providers for the internal audit function. Rich Gilbert, the state auditor, wanted to make sure the audit committee approved this because he has given us his okay to procure. It's a kind of a different procurement method we're using where he has pre-approved certain vendors we can work with so long as we follow this policy. So do we need to give you some additional time to look at that?
Well, it's not that long of a document, and I'm sure you've seen a million of these things, probably more than so. I've actually seen this document before, so if you want to take just a couple minutes, I don't mind, just so we don't have open items.
Okay.
Just take a, couple of minutes and read through it, and if you have questions, happy to carry it over. If you feel comfortable, moving forward, it's something, hopefully we can get closed out.
I'm sorry, guys, it's not in your
Oh, okay.
packets.
Okay.
I do apologize. Now, Rich has also reviewed this. He just wants to make sure that he gets the audit committee approval.
Yeah. Yeah, this goes way back, because it's all this a while back.
Have you developed a preferred vendor list? Have you already worked
Right,
with
that's,
the
yes,
council?
yes. There are 3 people, there are 3 vendors. We did an open kind of request for RFP, and we had 3 people respond: Experience, Deloitte, and Elliott Davis, and all 3 of those are on the preferred list. And as you can see in the policy, we have, as some come on board, as new vendors come on board, we'll just go through that same policy, get him to approve them.
We should probably attach the approved vendors as a Schedule A,
Okay.
subject to periodic amendment, and attach
Okay.
it to the document,
Okay.
just so it's there.
Oh, just one question on as far as the rotational position, is there an automatic rotation, or is there some period of time?
We try to do an automatic rotation, so if we use, say, Elliott Davis last time, if they also have what we're looking at doing, they are able to provide that service, and Experience they provide that service, then we'll probably go with Experience based upon, of course, pricing. We have to do pricing consideration, but if they're all things equal, we'll rotate to the next one.
Is that time frame task oriented, or is it a time frame?
It's task oriented based upon the audit plan and what services you guys approve us to go out and get outsourced services for.
So it would be rotated in one of those 3.
At this current point, those are the only three on the list.
And if they didn't have the competency in a specific area we were looking at, we would have to go back to the state auditor to add.
To add
new
someone
vendors to-
else, absolutely.
And that's probably, you know, as you look at what's going on in IT and stuff, I mean, over time, if I suspect there'll be new vendors, that'll probably be in that sort of area, because you are seeing new financial services, data security type firms popping up that are more out of the IT world than the traditional financial services type world. If I had to guess where you're likely to see that over time.
And this is only to augment audit services, it's not to support anything else within the audit organization.
Monica, I did look at this and I just wanted to check with you and see, I didn't see that it said it was subject to, or whether it supersedes like the service provider selection policy, or whether of the commission, like, does this, is it supposed to sort of say the audit doesn't follow that, it follows its own policy?
If I recall, I remember that that was for different, because this was really in the guise of the state auditor. So this falls to the state auditor. So it's following normal procurement guidelines.
So it'll still be, because it's just the authority, when I read that, it just says an external service provider may be engaged by the audit committee, and I didn't feel like it limited it to just those like three types or the three people.
We can make that distinction, that clarification if you'd like.
I think it does comply, because the audit committee, we set up to be able to pool resources,
That's
as
what
I recall.
I looked at that,
under
it's been a
our
while ago,
governance
but
policy.
it was in compliance with that. I specifically looked at that.
And would it be, just one more question, would it be subject to the approved budget by the commission also? Or
Well,
It does say that it's
subject to the approved budget?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and also audit committee, like, so when we do my plan, I do a resource approval attachment to the plan, so they know ahead of time what resources we're looking at using external service providers for and what the potential budget is for it. So all that's attached when they approve the plan. So
Gotcha.
they would be approving it, and if there's any differential material, we'd have to come back to them and ask.
Okay, I'm just trying to put all the pieces together and make
Yeah,
sure.
it's been a while since we've gone over this. When was it, 9?
Yeah.
No, 2/26 of this year, so it's been a while.
Okay. Are y'all comfortable? You need more time?
I'm comfortable, I like the
Okay.
idea of adding the exhibit
Yeah.
of the preferred vendors.
Yes,
for
I have that.
update
Yeah.
as we get new ones
You need a
approved.
motion for that?
Yes, please.
Make a motion that Peggy, you want, you can't do it, that's right. I'd make a motion that the list of preferred vendors be attached as what's called attachment A.
Yeah, Schedule A.
Schedule A.
Yeah. All right, do I have a second? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. All right. thank
And
you.
y'all are approving it.
We are subject to the Schedule A being attached.
Okay.
Are we going to work down these other two and come back to the code of ethics then?
The Commissioner Code of Ethics is also going to be addressed at this meeting, so the next one would be from our last meeting. There were two that related to the AIP SIOP audit. Don't expect any movement on this right now because we were waiting for some things to happen. When they currently, I guess they're looking at the fund stem reviews and all of that. So, but this was on the commission's to do follow-up, was to have a further discussion about statutory requirement of 70% allocation to equity on a cost versus basis, market basis. And then also looking at the addition of more timely standard reporting, which I think all of that was flowing out of strategic planning meeting. And then
Yeah, so, we did ask at 1P, everybody, all the commissioners for their input on what they wanted for standard reporting. I know you have sent me your request.
And I brought some, so when we sit down later, I got
Right, right,
examples.
and I have the reporting staff ready to sit down with you
Right.
and address that. So, we've asked the commissioners for their input, and are working on, creating a broader package of whatever reports you'd like to see. I don't have anything in progress immediately for the 70% allocation to equity, just because right now our allocation is at 40%, so we're not even, we're not really close to that. to that limit right now, but I think that'll be part of, part of the standard reporting that we can do with the administrator.
Yeah, but some of that's definitional though, right? Because like GMO can switch back and forth, and we have them, I don't know what category, right? Or your private equity guys. I mean, that's where how this is defined becomes important. There's cost, there's market, there's leverage adjusted. I mean, there's, I can think through 3 or 4 different, different ways, depending on how much we look through and how we categorize things can impact that.
That's true, because I was just thinking about our asset allocation.
The discussion or the inclusion of the cost versus market, what is that? I mean, are we mandated to do one or the other, or is this a question that's arisen in terms of?
It just says
auditing?
70%. It doesn't define.
That's the maximum that we can go to.
That's the maximum we can go to,
But
it's
it
not
doesn't define how it should be
measured. Correct.
So are we proposing that we
Define it.
define that?
And create a report where it can be tracked
Okay,
and
what are
audited.
we, how are we
tested.
handling it at the present time?
At the present time, I think we're doing it on market because our current flash
Okay.
reports,
Yeah, well, that makes
or
sense.
everything are done on current market
We're not a bank.
value.
Right.
Yeah. But I'll put that on the list.
All right.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think for adherence, and Gail, if you could, since you did the audit, if you could give us, tell me if I'm correct. I think during the audit, the issue for the recommendation was that for compliance, it was being done on a cost basis versus a market basis. Yes, that was the issue for the audit.
What? Enlighten me a little bit, why?
In order to see whether or not we were in compliance with the statute, they were using the cost basis. So even though you do reporting on a market basis, when it came to determining whether or not we were in compliance with the standard, what the commission was currently using is the cost basis.
Otherwise, it becomes like a hard cap, right? Like if the market value floats up, you have to rebalance at that point in time.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you're out of
Exactly.
statutory compliance, right? So, like when I had a mutual fund, right, ours was always on cost basis, right, for the SEC requirements, right? Otherwise, you'd have to have a hard and fast transaction against the compliance rule.
So that was one of the things that the audit committee wanted to look at and monitor, so. Okay.
So we're leaving that open.
We're leaving it open till
Right.
management's doing some work on it now, and when they close it out, I mean, I'll report on this every one, but I knew they still had it open, so next committee meeting before, I'll find out where they've gotten, and you guys just report back to you on it, okay? We have some closed items. If you'd like me to go over what closed since last meeting, I can. If not, we can move on to the next item. Good.
Probably wouldn't hurt just briefly touch on the recent ones for our new member.
So the last 4 ones were ones that were closed recently. There were presentation of 3 actions relative to the restructuring, and something got cut off here, but it was the restructuring of the audit and compliance department, and that actually got presented to the commission at the March 13th meeting as it was supposed to, and so that action got closed out on the March 13th meeting. There was also a conference with Funston Advisory Services to obtain feedback on ERM and best practices was, I think, the nature of that discussion. My understanding is that a conference call occurred with Alan, Dr. Wilder, and Rick Funston, and that was closed out on 4/28. There was also the approval of the audit committee charter by the full board, and that happened at it was approved at the May 1st, 2014 commission meeting where we had to revise our audit committee charter. So that was done and closed out on 5/1. And then the final one was implementation of compensation adjustment for Monica Houston that came out of the 4/22 meeting. It was the last action item that you guys had, and Alan discussed that with Senator Brett Ryberg. I didn't know an exact date, but I knew it was in April. Okay? All right, that is it for audit committee follow-up.
Okay. Next item, Commissioner Code Ethics. Andrew, I'll let you kind of maybe provide a little bit of background for Ms. Boyd.
Yeah, this
background.
topic's been touched on in a prior audit committee meeting. As you know, most folks are aware, in November at the commission meeting, the internal audit compliance department at the time presented the new employee compliance procedures. Part of those employee compliance procedures was a code of ethics acknowledgement. After that commission meeting, and actually during that commission meeting too, a lot of the commissioners came up to me and there was some informal discussion saying, hey, this is a good idea. Why don't we implement something like this? the audit committee took it up, discussed it at February's audit committee meeting. There was a draft that was circulated. The result of that audit committee meeting was, before we make a recommendation to adopt and send it to the commission, let's ensure that we get all commissioners' input. So I was instructed to send it out to all the commissioners. I sent it out twice if I didn't hear back from them, asking for their input. Most of the, actually, I didn't hear any negative input. Most of the commissioners said this is a great exercise. There was a few minor recommended changes, which I made. There was a couple questions. Some of the commissioners were ready to sign it right away, which obviously was a good thing, even though it was in draft format. So what we have before us is a slightly revised Code of Ethics acknowledgement for the commissioners from what was proposed in February. What we're looking for is for the audit committee to recommend to the commission for adoption of this Code of Ethics acknowledgement. I think there's a few important things to note. As you are aware, commissioners currently take an oath upon commencement of services and annually certify that they have no material interest. Other than that, there is no certification that they're following the other guidelines. This proposed Code of Ethics acknowledgement doesn't change any laws or policies that commissioners haven't already been obligated to follow, but instead we see it as an annual reminder and then another layer of additional best practices in regards to compliance.
Yeah, and I'll provide a little additional history too as well. Code of Ethics normally, for example, the one you would apply to staff where they're in possession of information and personal trading. Normally Code of Ethics get into personal trading and testing and audit.
Yep.
One of the things we kind of struggle with is how to make it applicable to the commission because there was some hesitancy or concern because normally, in an investment firm, all your personal trading records become part of the audit file and given FOIA, of this organization. So that was kind of one of the question marks, candidly, about sort of a code of ethics. And this one is written kind of generally. It doesn't go into that, but the employee one should, and I believe does cover personal trading.
And there's definitely a
activities,
difference in information flow.
Right.
Obviously we're open to sharing all information, but I think the commission staff is day to day looking at information. The commissioners, obviously when they request information, we give it to them, but they don't see everything that we see on a day to day basis.
But just to be clear, for the commissioners, the trading policy has not been applied.
No, it does not apply. It's not applicable laws and policies within the Employee Code of Ethics acknowledgement. It specifically spells out personal trading policy, conflict of interest and gift policy. As you know, in the Commissioner Code of Ethics, those are not noted. It mentions statutes, sourcing and conflict disclosure form, which was approved by the commission, governance policy, which was approved by the commission, and travel and other policies applicable.
Now, I will say the sourcing and conflicts form, has led to some what I call limited audit stuff of some personal trading.
Yeah, it's
so it may lead to some additional questions, but it wouldn't be what you would traditionally collect as a full, full battery of data, unrelated data.
And the sourcing and conflict disclosure form, given the commissioner's reduced role now in due diligence, that obviously it's still a requirement to be filled out if you're part of the due diligence or part of the sourcing, but that role is limited now, so it probably won't be filled out as often.
And again, the other reason we thought this was important, because again, kind of audit, you're always looking for the tone at the top, so it's kind of, when we were rolling this out to the staff, for it not to come, down from the full board, I don't think is the right tone to set, so.
Yep. And the one, if you guys are open to recommending adopting this, given the timing now, I think the one question is, will this be filled out annually on a fiscal year basis or annually on a calendar year basis? The employees do it on a calendar year basis just because we rolled out our new employee policies in December, so that made the most sense. It probably should be decided now. If you could sign it, you can recommend them signing it now and then annually, after the June fiscal year end. So.
Is there any advantage to having staff and commissioners sign at the same time, or there's no reason for that?
No, it's
Just
maybe
makes it
saves
easier.
15 minutes, but it's not anything that's too burdensome. So. The only one other thing, we don't need to get, the one thing I did potentially think of is potentially incorporating the disclosure for material interest in here, which is an annual requirement that flows into the annual investment report, but I think that's better as a standalone item. So because that's more of a narrative, this is more for you. So.
Any questions? form? Okay. Do I have a motion?
Move the read.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so this will become, again, the process on this, it will become a recommendation from this committee to the full commission, and then the full commission would have to adopt it at its next meeting. So,
Did you all indicate when, what's the recommendation on that score? I didn't-
On
I
the
wasn't
timing.
clear.
on the timing,
Yeah.
I think we would affect it, immediately upon approval and annually
Annual
thereafter.
thereafter.
His term's
So,
in June 30.
we'll
so
tie,
that
we'll
would
tie
make-
it in, on a calendar year basis. No, sorry, fiscal year basis.
Fiscal year, great, gotcha, thank you.
Next item, review and approval of internal audit charter.
That is, that's in your packet. One of the things that professional practice requires that an internal audit department have to be in line with the professional standards of an internal audit department is an internal audit charter. That charter stems from the audit committee charter. So the audit committee has their charter and their document that governs them, and basically it's a delegation of authority from the commission to the audit committee. This is a delegation of authority from the audit committee to the internal audit department or the chief audit officer. So that's what this document is, and it really kind of governs what we're able to do and how we're able to operate. It should be the last one that was on this side.
It may be, I think it's this one.
Behind the service.
It's behind it. Is that service provider? That's service
Yeah.
provider. I think we're
Need it.
short
Yeah.
a copy.
I have a problem.
So, pretty much this is, it's a standard. We did kind of tailor it for our organization a little bit, but this is really a standard templative type of document that comes from the Institute of Internal Auditors, which is the organization that sets our professional standards and practices for the internal audit professional. This also was provided to Funston, and this is one of the Funston recommendations. I did forget to say that this is a Funston recommendation. They have seen this exact document. They have no questions or revisions, recommendations relative to.
And I'd seen this a while back too, probably right about the time their report
That was-
came out.
Yes,
All right.
I did send it to you, so that you know what we sent to them.
Yeah, so you'll take as much time as you need, because I've had a little bit more time to look at it. motion? All right, do we have a second? Discussion? Any questions about it? What you read? Okay. And feel free to, I know it's kind of the first time you've seen it, so if you take additional time on whatever, we're happy to bring it back later. But if there's no further discussion on it, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Next item, enterprise risk management and compliance update. I believe that's you.
So as the non-new members are aware, at every audit committee meeting, you guys get the joy of me going through the Deloitte risk assessment dashboard for the last year and a half. I think most folks here are probably happy to see that go away. So what I'm here to report is we're replacing that Deloitte risk assessment dashboard, which still does have some tasks in progress, with the Funston Advisory Services recommendations. As you are aware, Funston came out with numerous recommendations, many of which apply to the task still in progress and many of which don't apply to the task still in progress. So what we thought was best is to move away from the Deloitte risk assessment dashboard. It served a great purpose. I think it's got us extremely far, and now we're going to take the ball from Funston recommendations and run with that. So on a go-forward basis, the plan is to have Sarah Corbett, the executive director, give periodic updates to the planning committee, the audit committee, and the commission on the status of the Funston recommendations. Sarah is currently in the process of assigning those recommendations to staff and setting respective deadlines. I'll hand it over to her to give a brief update.
Sure, and I've got a high-level overview of where we are right now. Of course, there were 124 recommendations that were identified by Funston. 108 of those can be addressed by RSIC, and 16 require action by the legislature or the treasurer's office. So we're really tracking, you know, what's within our purview and control. We have completed 27 of them so far, and we are finalizing this report. We're putting in deadlines for the remainder of the items. We also had a meeting with staff earlier this week. We want to make sure to keep documentation on the items so that we know what we did to close that item out. So just wanted to report that we have made progress on several of the items. We can go through some of those if you would like. You all have taken action on some of those. Some of those were audit committee items, developing the enterprise risk management function. Is an item that we were able to check off. The commission taking action of removing commissioners from due diligence is one of those items that we have completed. Here's the due diligence item. The administrator, the procurement of the administrator is an item. That was an item that also had procurement of risk management system on it. We split that item actually into two because those were two separate procurements for us, but it was one recommendation from Funston, so we split those into two. But as soon as I have this finalized, I can send this out to y'all for review. One thing we haven't completed yet, well, we completed the CEM recommendation last year as part of the Funston review. We plan to do that CEM report again this year. We've not completed it yet, but we've committed to do that. I feel like we need to get the fee reporting done for the financial statements first, and then submit to CEM for the cost analysis of the plan. So.
Any material items that we're still open on the Deloitte report?
I mean, there's some very broad items. I can go through them really quickly. But as we mentioned, here's an example, develop operational infrastructure. There's your administrator, there's your risk system. Right. Those have been covered. Fully develop risk management function. There's numerous recommendations in the Funston report that tackle the risk management function. Develop compliance function. There's specific recommendations within the Funston report, around, that's the thing. The Deloitte kind of gave you a holistic view.
Yeah.
The Funston said develop it around securities lending. You develop it around, touch up certain areas. So it gave us a much more bullet.
And Funston received the Deloitte report and the Deloitte dashboard and everything, so that was incorporated into their review. So I do think that we have a more granular task list now coming out of Funston, where we had the you know, the general, you know, you need technology, because when Deloitte was here, we didn't have Tamale.
Right.
We didn't have anything, so I think we've made progress, and the Funston recommendation said specifically, you need systems for this, and this.
Yeah.
So we're trying to track them a little bit more.
Was there anything on the Deloitte outstanding list that didn't make it to
No,
Funston, so everything's covered?
So the
under
the three we just mentioned, and the last one is a little bit, it's out of our control. Obtain additional FTEs to address key person risk and further enhance external manager oversight.
Yeah, and I think what Funston translated that into are specific HR functions, and we've taken action on that. The comp committee is now the HR and comp committee. The extent of that charter has been expanded to include oversight of human resources. We have hired an HR director. Some of the tasks on the Funston report that are associated with the HR director are, you know, really try to build out the HR function, and that is planning of, you know, really thinking about the HR component. If we are going to, say, if we're going to do internal training, to think about what systems do we need and what people do we need in order to do that. And so I believe Funston addressed it with those specific they got more granular, saying that we need to tie our HR needs to the business plans.
I have some other updates, but
Yeah.
any other questions on the funds? Okay. I was going to give a brief update on enterprise risk management. As you guys are aware, I gave a presentation at WAMP about enterprise risk, you know, high level, where I envision it going within the investment commission. As a follow-up to that, I just wanted to mention that today's audit committee, as I mentioned at WAMP, what I plan to do is meet with all commissioners, ideally within the next month, on a one-on-one basis, with two main goals. One, what deliverables do they want from the enterprise risk department? Like I mentioned at the WAMP, I don't want to just develop all these policies and then my deliverable is something that's not even useful for you. So I'm interested in hearing commissioners' input on what they want deliverables, and then also do a risk discussion. And I think,
Can I add
Yeah.
some? For Ms. Boykin's benefit, you had provided, at least I know I've seen it, have the other commissioners gotten the notebook of sort of samples from other systems? It probably wouldn't be bad to share that.
Yeah, I mean, some of
Right.
those, you know, I can't share with some of them. I
Right.
can. The ones that are public,
Right.
I put within
Yeah.
within the.
Was that in our WAMP materials, or was that
There
something
was
only I got?
examples within the WAMP materials
Okay.
of excerpts.
Can
But
I
I
make
can-
sure Ms. Boykin
Yeah, I
gets a copy
definitely
of
will.
that, please?
And then that's a great discussion.
When Andrew did his section at WAMP, he had he wants to, you know, get a sense, you know how we went through that sort of identifying risk, and then he had some examples of some actual deliverables from other,
Oh.
you know, so eventually we want to get it to something that's useful to the commissioners, right, rather than just generate more data points, but some feedback. And so those were some examples, because sometimes ERM, you know, when people talk about it, it sounds like it's up here, but you're really trying to get down to something that's reportable and actionable, right? You know.
And I could bring those examples when
Right.
the discussions with the commissioners are one-on-one.
Yeah. So I was just saying to make sure Ms. Boykin got a copy of that, and, you know, other commissioners, you know, see it, because I think it helps make it a little bit more tangible of what sort of outputs are you trying to track.
It would be helpful, because I'll bet money that the fiduciary review that's being done with PIBA, one of the recommendations will be to develop enterprise risk management function. So I'll predict that one now. So. And then I just give a brief update on compliance. I think, you know, the compliance department's made vast progress in a lot of areas: investment compliance, employee compliance. You know, I've had some good discussions with Monica about other areas compliance can cover. So I think, you know, upcoming audit committee meeting, whether it's the next one or the one after, I think it would be helpful if the compliance department discuss what are potential areas that the compliance department can cover within their scope, but obviously given, you know, the resource restrictions. So prioritize, and I think most people, or everybody, had the priority that employee compliance and investment compliance were 1 and 2. And I'm not saying we're there all the way, but we made leaps and bounds in those areas. So once those are kind of put to rest and just more of an ongoing monitoring, there is potential to broaden that. But I think that'd be good for an interactive discussion at the audit committee at the upcoming meeting. So that's all I had.
Any questions for Andrew? Next, 2014 audit plan update.
Okay, so this is a report on last year's fiscal year, what you guys approved versus what we have done. Anything in green are items that we completed over last fiscal year. The items that are in orange are items that we still consider to be valid based upon the risk assessment for the current year, and we are recommending they be rolled to the 2015 plan. Then we have 2 items of yellow that are on hold that I'd like to kind of discuss a little bit more in detail.
Before you do that, do you mind, for Ms. Boykins' benefit, go over a little bit of the review types again, since we have a new committee member?
Absolutely. So with the internal audit, and I'll have to talk about this from when we were internal audit and compliance together. We did one consolidated plan, internal audit and compliance. So that meant we wore 3 different hats. We wore an audit hat, a consulting hat, and a compliance hat. And it was really important that everyone understood for what engagement, which hat we were wearing because of professional standards, also as well as output that could be expected. So we set an output, a particular output. For instance, if it's an audit, it is going to definitely end up in an audit report that gets issued, and each member of the audit committee will get a copy of that report, as well as every commissioner will have a copy of the results of that particular audit. If it's a consulting assignment, it's where we're going in to talk with management to kind of work through an area that maybe we know they need some structure, some help, or management has said to us, we think we might want you to look at this area, give us your opinion, either from a compliance perspective or from an audit perspective. It could have been either one that they wanted. But that consulting assignment was done, and the end product was determined at the time of the engagement. So it could have been a memo, it could have just been a product that we might have tangibly given, like maybe helping them with a policy or procedure. If it was compliant, audit cannot do that, but compliance most certainly could. And so consulting assignment, that was it. Then we also had compliance, and this is where pretty much we were doing things for the compliance department and as a result of their responsibilities from managing and monitoring compliance within the organization. So those were the 3 hats that we wore, and we thought it was important to identify the type of review that we're doing so that the expectation could be set from an audit committee perspective as well as an auditee perspective as to what type of engagement it was.
Yeah, and that was important because obviously on the resourcing side, initially there were no documents, right? So you can't really go and audit something's compliance. Someone had to draft a document and then set it up for a compliance procedure.
And then auditing, an audit can't draft what we audit, as you're well aware. So that's kind of how you have the types of engagements. And we still kind of have those types, but because we've split off now, you won't really see much compliance on the audit plan. It's either going to be audit or consulting. That's all the internal audit department will be doing. Okay. So going over the areas of green, we did complete management fees and expenses, and this was for fiscal year. This was fiscal year of 2013 is what we completed. We are currently looking at fiscal year 2014. So right now that's the second one that you see here that's still in progress. We are currently looking at, fiscal year 2013 is what we're looking at now. We're 2014, that's correct, I'm sorry. We're looking at 2014 now. It's hard to kind of think back. 2014 is what we're looking at now. 2013 is what we looked at earlier in the year. The first one, as you can see, was a consulting assignment where we went in and we looked and we saw that it was originally designed to be an audit, but there was a lot more benefit to the organization, added value to go in and help them kind of put some policies, procedures in place. And there was also in flux, I believe, they were changing over the process of how they were doing their fees, management fees reporting. So we did a consulting assignment. We completed that assignment. Right now, we're actually doing the audit. We're going back and saying, okay, per this consulting assignment we did, how are you guys coming out with what you're doing for this fiscal year? So we're currently doing that. Andrew also completed the ethics, conflicts of interest, compliance work. that was the next green item. If you go to page 2, the Information and Technology GCC, that was a consulting assignment. Basically what that was an in-depth risk assessment. In order to get an audit plan, we do a risk assessment of all auditable areas within the organization. So we basically look at the organization, say, okay, what processes, procedures do they have in place? We kind of group them into auditable units, which you see here, all of these are auditable units. And we do a risk assessment based upon those auditable units. Well, ITGC was just one unit, so we did it at a very high level initially because we weren't really very highly IT dependent. But as we were moving more towards infrastructure, to more towards IT dependency, I thought it would be value added to have Deloitte come in, and it was kind of right on time with what was happening for the state to look at our ITGCs, which is IT General Control. So they have actually completed that review. The report is in draft format. We were targeting getting it ready for this meeting. They had a glitch internally where it did not go through their internal management review process in a timely manner. So we don't have it available for you at this one. We would definitely have that for your review and discussion at the next audit committee meeting. But management has the draft that they're looking at. James is looking at it. And I think PIVA actually also is currently, because PIVA supports us in this area, they have a copy. Robbie has a copy. I think he's back today looking at it. I think he was out of the office, so that actually, we should be getting, I guess, a response from you guys. But really, this is more ours than it is PIVA's. This is around what IT dependencies we have, and although we use PIVA as a outsourced service provider, it's still incumbent upon us to make sure that we have adequate ITGC. Okay. So then the incentive compensation, of course, we had done that previously. The AIP and SIOP compliance is what we discussed at the last meeting. We also have completed the annual investment report, and that report has been issued. That report is in your folder for your review. Didn't plan on discussing it at this meeting, but if you have any questions or concerns, we can also let me know. We'll put it on the agenda for the next meeting. But you do have a copy of that report in your packets. Then we also completed some, I guess what we would call departmental processes for ourselves. We're going around, we're asking others to put in policies and procedures, so internal audit should not be exempt from that. So we actually completed putting in internal audit policies and procedures. What we've done that, you've seen some of the procedures come before you that we have established: service vendor procedures, internal audit committee, internal audit audit charter. We also have established guidelines for how we document our work papers, how that review process goes. So we have an internal audit manual that we have actually developed for us and how we do our work and what governs our work. We also established a protocol for how we, the process we utilize in doing our audits in terms of opening meetings, closing meetings. So all of that has been documented and put into place. So those are right now our departmental standards. So we also are putting the rigor around our department as we're asking other departments and units to do. So we have completed that. And then of course the fiduciary audit, which is a big one, which Andrew worked on, has been completed as well. So those are items of completion for the fiscal plan of 2013-14. 2013-14 we did a lot in 2013-14, particularly Andrew with the funds. So we did have some items that kind of rolled over, which are in the orange. The investment contract management, we were due to start that, but because of strategic planning session, Herschel asked that we push that back because it would have been a resource drain on him at the same time as that. And so we will actually be starting up, that's the next audit in queue. The ongoing due diligence and investment operational, we actually kind of pushed that off because they're still trying to get that up and running. They did hire Scott Forrest, who is the operational due diligence officer. And so he's currently doing that. So we think that they'll be ready for an audit this period, this plan year. Investment approval and funding is another one that we just did not have time and resources to complete in the prior year, unfortunately. The ethics conflicts of interest was pushed as approved by you guys at the last meeting, because he had just implemented the policies and procedures, so we needed to give it time in order for us to be able to audit that. And then performance reporting, they're doing that, the conifer is actually looking at that right now, and that's, am I correct, that performance reporting is one of the things that the administrator is going to be doing. So we're going to be looking at that post whatever comes out of the conifer implementation. And then lastly, agency relations and securities lending, those two are just also areas that we just did not get time to do, that we are recommending for the 2015 plan. Then lastly, we have the items in yellow. The items in yellow are items that we...
Can I maybe interject just on that last one on the conifer and the reporting?
Yeah.
Particularly because it's scheduled as an audit, and this kind of goes, I know we've mentioned it, but as they're getting it set up, I don't know what their systems and modules are going to, allow, but a big piece of reporting is the associated disclosures that go with the reporting, because, right, you run different reports for different reasons, to different levels of accuracy or timeliness, or, give some thought and speak with Conifer about the disclosure modules that are attached to reports that come out, right? Because I only say that because you're going to do an audit, and there may be some reports that are going to be valuable reports, but they either aren't to certain standards, meaning like in the industry, you can use certain things internally that you don't want to do externally. We're in a weird environment because we're in a FOIA sort of, always public interfacing role, right? So, I mean, I think if we gave some real thought to how disclosures around the reporting are handled in terms of the audit, the audit trail, because, sometimes you're going to be auditing for accuracy. Part of that accuracy being, are the disclosures accurate, not necessarily is the information in the report completely accurate, because you may get, for example, private equity valuations, right, where you're doing roll forward, right, you may ultimately subsequent, right, have different data points, but at that point in time. So I think the disclosures around that reporting, as we prepare to do audit, are going to be an important element.
Monica, would it make sense, and I'm guessing you thought of this already, so probably not, performance reporting to make it a consulting engagement, because Conifer's only going to be up and running, I mean, when are they going to go live? At best in September, so you're only going to have a few months of bandwidth, and you might be able to help a lot on some of the comments that Alan just mentioned as far as disclosure. It's just a thought, because I know you're looking at from the risk level, but it's just going to be, and that's where you add a ton of value, is kind of putting in process and procedures, and it's going to be such a new process.
Yeah, and in audits, we do that as a value add. Performance reporting is nothing new to the organization, although we're utilizing Conifer to do it now. So we will capture what Conifer is doing in the audit. We can look at it as we get closer in, but as you can see, that's not due to a year from now, basically.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I was looking.
Okay.
Oh, I was looking at last
I was
year.
gonna say,
Yeah.
we could do some testing of the custodian's performance too, because that is what we've relied on, historically. So I don't, we might want to think about that as well. And, I want to reconcile
Actually,
to the
we did move it to
custodian's
Q1.
performance with Conifer to make sure that they're.
Q1, and if we look at
Oh,
I did
okay.
move it to Q1, but we can look at the timing of that. too.
Yeah, just because
Okay.
they're only going to have
Yeah.
anyone from 3 months or
That's,
so.
yeah,
so.
yeah, we can look at that.
Okay.
Any other questions on the ones rolling over? So for the ones that are on hold, we talked about one of these last time, the valuation of investments. We were kind of waiting in the initial due diligence. We were looking to see what Funston did in terms of the information that they were looking at, because they looked at due diligence in quite detail. So I think we got a comfort level that we were comfortable with not doing anything around that area for this reporting year. What we are recommending for next year, and it's something that came out of the Funston's recommendations, and it affects valuation of investments as well, as they have recommended that we engage a third-party independent service provider to look at valuations and initial due diligence, and we're currently working with Clifton Lawson Allen to, since they're doing the audit for the PIVA, there is definitely efficiencies in leveraging of the information that they currently have in order to do a specific report for us. Right now, they go in and they do look at this. In order to do the PIBA audit, they have to look at this, but they're not able to provide us with management comments that would be probably very beneficial to our organization because we're not considered the client. So what this will be doing is asking them to do agreed upon procedures for us in which we can take advantage of the benefit from work that they are currently already doing and maybe just would have to do a little bit more to do agreed upon procedures for us. Sarah, would you like to?
Yeah, so, I mean, I know we've talked to Rich Gilbert about that. He's
Yes.
amenable to doing it. So if the audit committee's, amenable to doing it, I think that would be good. Then we, actually receive a letter from an external audit firm about our performance. And I think that would be helpful. What I was wondering is, I know you've got the ongoing due diligence on the audit plan too, if that's something that potentially we could add to that scope.
Yeah, depending upon what they will look at, I'm not sure. Initially, I was told it was just going to be the initial
Just
due
initial.
diligence.
Well, if they're testing evaluation, they'll have to look at ongoing,
Yeah.
so.
So I just don't know. We can ask, that was one of the areas, I'm currently drafting those
Okay.
agreed upon procedures, and that's an area in which I've asked them for guidance and direction.
Okay. Well,
on what
yeah,
we can do.
if we could do that, that might be a good, way to get that included as well.
Can I ask a question of the types of things in that? Because, I mean, this is the one thing that the result of all this kind of bothered me, only because there's no set standard for what a requirement, the due diligence requirement level is, right? Meaning someone who is knowledgeable and comfortable can make decision with much less information than someone else who isn't, right? And we somehow elevated this thing of due diligence that in the regulatory structure and otherwise, an experience structure has really no sort of standing to say, well, we don't have this, you have not done adequate due diligence, whereas someone with a different background and experience can look at something and not necessarily have to have that piece of information that in an audit file might otherwise be lacking. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, can you talk about that a little bit? Because I
Well,
just,
I mean,
I think we've taken this thing and we sort of elevated it in a way that,
I mean, I've worked at 3 different investment firms that all looked at similar types of investments. No 2 of them had the exact same due diligence procedures, but I think they all felt comfortable that their due diligence procedures were appropriate. So an auditor is not going to be able to come in and say your due diligence procedures are appropriate or up to standard. I think that's what Funston did. I mean, Funston, as you know, they had a depth of knowledge on their team, especially on the investment side, and I think some of the recommendations where we almost went, or we did go too far in the due diligence procedure. The pendulum swung so far. So what a Clifton Marks now is going to do is say, here's your procedures, were your procedures followed?
right.
So I mean, the only way you're truly going to get
And that's all the
comfortable-
SEC cares about.
That's
If
all-
you
yeah.
say you do it, do you
Yeah,
do it?
exactly, and
right?
as long as folks internally.
But you
and-
can change that over time as well. And
Yeah,
I feel like all of a
yeah.
sudden we are trying to etch in stone this permanence to a process
No.
into
No.
certain, and
No, I
linking
don't
that
think-
to certain documents, which,
Yeah, I mean, and that is probably one advantage to keeping that on the internal audit for space versus external, but although we can have them do agreed upon procedures. But when it comes to kind of looking at our operational and consulting and saying, well, where are we going from here? This is good, it's been good, but our organization's changed, so this policy may no longer be quite amenable to us. That's where the internal audit expertise from a consultant standpoint would need to come in. And to the extent that we have that, we feel comfortable doing that, we'll do that. If not, we can get outsourced provider to do it. But to look at it from that perspective, and that's something that typically an agreed upon procedure does not do.
But I mean, I think it's fair to say, the investment staff is constantly reevaluating the due diligence process.
well, and I guess my question is how documented is that at this point in time? I
Well-
mean, we're not here every day. I mean,
The due
are they?
diligence procedures?
Yeah.
Oh,
They're
they're
documented.
very documented, to the point, yeah, I mean, they're extremely thorough. I mean, you guys see the due diligence report that you guys get a copy within, when memo's presented, and behind that is all the associated documents behind it. And it follows the due diligence guidelines that were approved by the commission in November 2000? October 2000.
Now, there is a distinction between the initial investment due diligence and then the ongoing due diligence. I think you guys are still building out your ongoing due diligence, is that correct? You finished that already? I haven't
No,
talked about this in
There
a
are
while.
ongoing due diligence guidelines that are in place.
Exactly, yes.
And that are being followed,
Right.
including financial statement
Mhm.
reviews.
Yeah.
Semi-annual calls, review of performance. You know, I think we've added procedures. We do the annual compliance questionnaire, which is, you know, something that we've recently done. Now we have, you know, Scott on the officer diligence side, which is another touching point too.
So.
Right,
then
and
my
I'm talking
question-
about Scott's work is what I'm talking about on the operational due
Well,
diligence
it-
side.
On operational due diligence, he doesn't have ongoing due diligence requirements because, you know, just keeping up with the investments in the pipeline is
Right, exactly,
enough
that's what I,
for
that's.
one person.
That's
But
right.
we have ongoing due diligence guidelines in place that the investment staff performs.
Right.
And then we've got the joint valuation committee that meets once a quarter with PIBA's staff to go over the financial statements and the roll forwards. So ongoing due diligence is performed.
Right.
Scott is not necessarily responsible for every manager in the portfolio, because I just don't think that's
Yeah.
feasible to put on his
Where,
Right,
Where
or
we
even
slide-
a risk-based.
where we slide Scott into the process is on the ongoing side is we use the compliance questionnaire. And within the compliance questionnaire are questions that are supposed to trigger red flags.
Mhm.
Has there been a change in auditor? Has there been a change in administrator? Has there been an SEC investigation? Is there a letter associated with that? You know, it's 20-some questions. What it's supposed to try to standardize it, he's, as part of our procedures, reviewing the annual compliance questionnaire, he has to review every one of those questionnaires, his pertinent questions, and if he sees something where there is an issue, then it would get escalated.
Right, but
So-
again, that's on the operational side, right? So he's looking
Yeah,
at it
that's-
from the operation, that's operational, and so that is subject to self-reporting. So again, that's what I'm saying, I just want to make it clear that there's delineation between the investment due diligence, the operational due diligence from an ongoing basis. And, I mean, I think it should be looked at overall, just to make sure that the audit committee has a comfort level, that's all I'm saying is.
You mean it's self-reporting as far as?
Well, no, the compliance, when you're getting this back from the managers are self-reporting this to us. They're saying, yes, I have had no change, no, I have this. I mean, and there's just way too many managers for us to know, you know, Scott's going based on what they do, so there needs to be some other things that are looked at to ensure that the information they're reporting to us that we're relying upon is good, but that's what we would look at in an audit, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would look at that in an audit to make sure that, you know, yeah, we're doing that, but how do we gain comfort, if needed, how do we gain comfort around what they're reporting to us to ensure that we're making our decisions? He's saying, you know, it's triggering my operational, but what if they haven't reported that they had a change? What happens if, you know, because it's all self-reporting. So this is what we would do if we were doing this operational review. We would go in and we would look at what you do currently have in place and see to what extent it needed to be expanded upon, whether it was adequate, whether it was not. That's why it's on the schedule right now.
Yeah, no, I understand, and that adequacy is a very subjective thing, I mean, that's what.
Right,
a lot of
and
it
I
comes
guess that's
down
my
to,
concern,
like,
is we are
yeah.
forcing on
That's why we
an
like.
investment
yeah.
organization, a culture that is so audit ready, compliance, right, that it loses perspective of that risk return trade-off. That is the
Oh,
very
yeah.
essence of making
I mean,
investments.
I think
right?
one good touching point is that, as far as I'm aware, most pension funds do not have a separate ops due diligence. We're one of the
Yes.
leaders in
Right.
that fund
Right.
area. Plus, we have HEK contracted to do ops due
Right.
diligence. Obviously, we can always improve on processes, but I think in that area, we're definitely an industry leader. I mean, yeah, we could hire 10 ops due diligence people and visit every single manager on site, but are we truly gonna get the value
Yeah.
worth it for
I
the
mean, and
investment?
I'm not saying we should or should
Yeah.
not. What I'm saying is, we need to look at it to be able to tell the audit committee and management if, you know, if there is
Yeah, I think
something
it's-
there, you know,
But,
that's
I mean,
all.
I think that's a valid point, though, is, you know, is due diligence something that's high on your radar at this point?
Exactly.
Or does the audit committee feel, you know, after the Funston review and with the initial due diligence guidelines and with our ongoing due diligence guidelines and with the valuation committee, you know, is that an area that you're comfortable with and you'd like us to focus on something else? You know, because for me, of course, I'm living it every day, but, I've lived those due diligence guidelines and I've lived the valuation committee, and so I'm comfortable with that area. I'm comfortable with fees. There are other areas of the organization where I'm not as familiar with what we're doing, and so, that's a
and we're gonna
conversation
talk
we've
about that when we
had.
talk about the plan, when we talk
Yeah.
about the 2014-15 plan.
Yeah, I guess my thing is, are there other areas of the
Mm-hmm.
organization where we collectively haven't spent as much time that could be beneficial to us to spend time in that area and kind of spread out the audit areas a bit? Because that is something that we hear certainly from the investment staff is, are we too process oriented? And maybe the pendulum has swung too far the other way. I know when I got here 3 years ago, there weren't any due diligence guidelines. And so I think having some due diligence guidelines is important, because I think that helps us to have discipline about what we do. But I think it's a very good conversation to have about, are we too far? Because we don't want people to be process oriented. We want them to think about the investment decision. So, I think finding that happy medium is something that I think all of us would be very, very happy about. That may not make it as auditable if you do it, or we have to allow for more subjectivity in the guidelines. But that's something that.
Yeah, and we'll discuss kind of that same thread when we look at the 2014-15 plan, 'cause that's a good thread for it talks about how we come up with the plan, and that's why the plan is up for your approval, to get your feedback on what you guys see are the permanent risks to the organization. I can tell you kind of how we got to where we got to in the process we used, but then the ultimate decision is up to yours as to what goes on this plan or what comes off.
I think it's a good area. I think in terms of work product, just as a commissioner, some of what's coming back, some of the things we'd be looking at back to that level of documentation, right? Because ultimately, I think commission could give some guidance of, okay, this item truly is auditable. Without it, we're not going forward, versus, these areas, you have more flexibility on, right? And to communicate that back to the staff. So, I think ultimately the output of that one would give us a better sense of, I have no idea what sort of internal documents,
Right.
I guess one question I would have is there duplication, or too much duplication, or is it just a belt and suspenders process where the investment people do their due diligence, and then you do your due diligence? You're looking over their shoulder to make sure that they're doing the proper due diligence, or again, are we getting into the area of process serving rather than?
Well, that is something. So the external auditors do look at the due diligence files every year. So, and that external auditor is hired by the state auditor, and the audit engagement is with PIVA, but it concerns investments because that's part of the balance sheet of PIVA. So every year, that firm comes in and reviews our due diligence files. They select a sample of new investments, and I think they do ongoing as well. So they come in and are testing it. And so some of the feedback that we've gotten, now this isn't written because we're not the client, but what they have verbally told us is that we've come, a long way, and that they're very happy with our process and our documentation, and they've looked at the tamale system and they've looked at our documentation. They're very happy with it. But I don't have that in writing because we're not the client.
But Sarah, that's initiated by EVA?
It's
part
part
of
of their
their
audit
audit.
of the
Oh.
balance sheet, yes.
Oh, okay.
But to just give you a sense of, they look at it every year, so you're covered to some degree in that. And there are AICPA guidelines where it's at least generally what should be in a due diligence file. And I know that we looked at those AICPA guidelines when we looked at those due diligence guidelines to begin with. Again, there is inherent subjectivity in it because of the fact that it is an investment decision. But we tried to use that, as somewhat of a basis to make sure that we were covering the basic groundwork that we could. And then Funston, of course, looked at the due diligence process when they were here. So they did an in-depth dive on due diligence. So I just want you to know that due diligence is something that is covered by the external audit firm.
And what this agreed upon procedures would do, if we move forward with it, is they would document it. They would select 5 investments. You would get a letter saying, we selected 5 investments for initial due diligence. We looked at these and these documents. There was no exceptions, or there was exceptions. This was the exception.
It may not be 5, it depends.
Yeah, I'm just throwing out
A representative sample
A
probably
representative
of what the population is. But let me just to kind of baseline this is, from a perspective of audit, and this is where my area of expertise is although PIBA has an external auditor that does work in this area, typically you are not, it's not best practice to rely upon your external auditor as your control. So your external auditor is not supposed to be your control. Management should be aware of what's happening prior to the external auditor coming in. They should be comfortable that their internal control environment, process, and procedures are operating effectively and efficiently without the assurance that is provided by the external auditors. The external auditors are there to do the job on the financials and the financials only. Their materiality levels can be very vastly from what would need to be done in an operational review or audit. So I just want to make that distinction of 2 things, is that 1, reliance should not be placed on your external auditors. That's just not best practice, and really professional standards say that that should not be done. And then the second item is their level of materiality can vary greatly because they're looking at people's financial statements versus when they come over and they look at ours from our perspective. So when they come and they do the agreed upon procedures for us, they're going to be looking at our population. And of course, we're feeding through the people, so it's probably going to be the same thing. But this is because we're talking about this specific item, but in other items, I'm just talking about in general of having an external audit firm. You place reliance on an external audit firm for certain things. Their materiality level for what they do for one organization could be vastly different from this other organization. Plus, even if they did it for our organization and they were looking at it from a financial statement perspective, materiality is always a factor, whereas when we're looking at it from an audit perspective, we're looking at materiality, but we're going a little bit more deep. We're looking at operational process procedures. They're going to look at controls, but they look at controls from a different perspective and at a very high level, whereas we're going to do a little more detailed deep dive. That's why things are typically found at an internal audit level that are not found at a financial statement level because of the differential in materiality.
Quick question I have, and that's a good point, but the agreed upon procedures, there is no materiality, right? It's
Oh.
yes or it's no.
Well, no, it depends on how we describe the agreed
Yeah,
upon
but I mean, if you're
procedures.
doing due diligence procedures and you're saying, is there a completeness check? Is there a sourcing and conflict disclosure form? Is there a placement agent letter? There's no materiality. There is
Oh,
none.
there might be in your
was.
selection of your sample.
But your sample would be bigger than, are you saying?
It depends on what you set. If you say if my materiality, for materiality
So you're
levels,
saying the selection, so if we pay
selection
for
can
more
be-
selection, but the
you
detail
could.
testing, there's no materiality.
No,
It's yes
well,
or no.
no, there's never materiality at your detailed
That's fine.
testing. No, there's never materiality. It's only in the selection of your sample size,
Makes sense.
and in areas in which you look at, based upon materiality. Not just the testing. But we're getting very granular. We want to kind of bring it back. I think this is that this is something that you guys can make a decision on in a few minutes when we look at the 2014-2015 plan in terms of what you guys want to see. I'll go through how we determine what's on the plan, our audit methodology that we utilize to do that, and then you guys can also weigh in along with management as to what you would like to see on the 2014-15 plan. This is just an update of the 2013-14 plan, which you had approved. We're coming back saying this is what we got done this year, and this is what we've moved forward to the next year. For evaluation of investments in initial due diligence, those are 2 items that we are proposing along with management to allow agreed upon procedures to be done for the plan year of 2014-15. So we placed, and to Sarah's point, because of the work that was done last year, we did not do an audit of this area last year. So it was on our plan, but we put it on hold. So we never completed the work because Funston did so much work on it. And we looked at what Funston did and we said it was adequate to meet the needs and make sure that the risk was addressed in that current plan year. So that's why we did not look at it last year. if you remember from our meeting, we actually put that on hold, and you guys were in agreement on that we would look to see what Funston did and make sure we were comfortable with it, that they looked at it in detail enough level. We were comfortable with it, so we didn't feel it needed to be done for 2014, 2015, for 2013, 2014. Now we're gonna be moving on to 2014, 2015, and we can have a discussion as to what we do for 2014, 2015. But I just wanted to report back to you on what our progress was on what you approved for 2013, 2014. Any questions about 2013, 2014? Okay, so then we can kind of carry this discussion over to the 2014, 2015 plan. And we'll talk a little bit about how we develop our audit plan. And the audit plan is, we use a risk-based audit plan, which is part of what the professional standards recommend that we use as a risk-based audit plan. As I mentioned previously, we take all of what we call the auditable units within the organization, and we risk-based them. We did a presentation on that early on. I know Ed.
I was just going to
you had
say,
the
if y'all
benefit
could
of that.
schedule time.
We will, when she's onboarding. That's why I didn't want to take everybody through the same thing again, but when she onboards, we should, we'll explain this to her more detail and actually run her through that same presentation we gave you guys. But we have auditable units that we look at each area within the organization. We look at it from a strategic risk perspective. We look at it from a operational, let me tell you the areas. We look at it from a financial, operational, compliance, and strategic risk. So we look at all 4 areas. We do it's computational in nature, but somewhat subjective, because there is a range of how you can manage things about, impact to strategic objectives, impact on employee morale. That's all part of strategic, or materiality levels, fraud susceptibility. These are things that would be on the financial risk score. Complexity of account or process stability, department management stability, that's on the operational risk score. For compliance risk score, things like the policy or regulation time horizon, the recent or prior exception exposure, organizational tone. These are things that we look at from a compliance score. So we look at all of these different areas. For each one of these auditable areas, we based upon what we know about the organization, we try to get feedback and input from key people within the organization about what's on the horizon, because there might be things changing from prior year in terms of, like, for instance, if they're going to be doing more internal trading, well, our risk assessment in terms of operational is going to be a little bit different this year. If you're heightening that up, then it would be last year. So we try to take into account what is currently happening within the organization, which is why we don't just do this. We do it annually, but we actually are always monitoring it. And that's why we will come back to you periodically throughout the year to say, we need to update the plan based upon either risk or some items that we're seeing, so we always come back to you to get an update on the plan. So we do this risk assessment as required or recommended by professional standards to determine what we call a risk assessment. We assess it as low, moderate, or high. So each auditable unit is ranked either low, moderate, or high. Our current audit philosophy and methodology for our department is that if anything is ranked a high, it is looked at every single year, because the risk to the organization is high. If it is ranked a moderate, it is put on a cycle plan and it's looked at every other year. If it is ranked a low, we try to look at lows at least at a minimum every 3 years, but definitely we try to get to each auditable unit within a 5-year cycle period. That is kind of what we utilize in determining how the audit plan works. So what you have before you on your audit plan is based upon the 2014-15 risk assessment that was done, and areas that rolled out as high or what we call moderate high. Because of resources, we try to do our cutoff of absolute must make the plan at a high moderate. High moderate is anything that scores greater than a 15 on our chart. So if it's greater than a 15, it's an absolute cutoff for us. We must put it on the plan for your review. Anything other than that, it's really subjective to what we feel, if it meets our 2-year requirement or our 3-year cycle requirement to go on here. We had a few items that, that were meeting that, but did not make the plan. One was the internal asset management. It came out as a moderate. It's been a moderate for the last 3 years, this being the 3rd year. So technically, it would go on to our plan. However, I had internal discussions, and I think this is an area which Sarah has expressed she would like some more comfortability around. As I explained to her, we can address it. It did not go on the plan currently because in discussing it with other internal resources, there had been last year a consultative assignment that Andrew used management hours for in that particular area, in which they recently put policies into place around soft dollar items, best execution,
They're putting their own
counterparty
place, yeah.
risk,
Yeah.
broker selection, and then there were also some Funston recommendations specific to these areas. So we wanted to give them an opportunity to get all of this in place before we actually put it on the audit plan, which is why it did not go on the audit plan. And so it's a moderate. So in terms of risk to the organization right now, it is risk, but it's not high risk, it's not high moderate, it's a moderate, it's a true moderate risk to the organization. So we felt that it was something that we could let go another year, not put on the plan. Sarah has a concern, so as I said to her, what we could do, if she would like us to look at that, is we have 200 management hours, which you'll see are on the plan, in which management has discretion to ask us to look at anything. And, you know, we will try to do our best to, it's called management requests, to respond to them within those 200 hours. So we could, if she would like us to, look at that in some way, shape, form, or fashion, because she agreed that it was an area where things were currently being put into place, but we could do that on a consulting assignment with her and engagement, or if she says, I want an audit, we can do an audit, but we would talk about that, and we haven't had an opportunity to talk about that more, but we could kind of grab that out of the management hours. If we talk and she wants an audit out of this, it would probably be a recommendation to come back on the plan for an update to say, we'll pull the hours from the management hours and put it on the plan as an actual audit assignment. So that's kind of how that would work. So that was one item that did not make the plan, that should have made the plan per our cycle. The other item that should have made the plan per our cycle was the annual compliance. No, that's not the one. Okay, so it's derivatives, derivative investments. It was a low. It's been a low. And talking with Andrew, he says Russell basically executes on our behalf, and they manage the counterparty risk. We review their reports. We still, I know there's some.
There's a Funston recommendation too,
right,
that we should
around
draft the counterparty risk monitoring
Right.
procedures, and they're working.
And they're working on that, and it's a low to the organization. So typically, because it's the 3rd year and it's low, we should be looking at it, but we have up to 5 years to look at low items. If we, you know, every item, every auditable unit should be looked at on a 5-year cycle basis. So we have time to look at that, but I just wanted to kind of disclose that to you. And then the one last one was what we call the annual compliance review, and that's basically where Andrew, once he gets compliance up and running, will be looking at himself on an annual basis saying, here's my compliance review. So I have a note here that Alan and Andrew are still working on reporting and still developing policy procedures around that whole annual compliance, around the compliance.
I do it every
area.
day.
So, yeah, every
day I look at my work. So.
Yeah.
If I could just do it once a year.
It has to be formal.
Alright.
We have to. It's something called, I think you're familiar with it, Alan, when you do the annual compliance review, where you could go back and you say, all of the compliance stuff didn't do what we were supposed to.
Right.
So.
I'll calm down, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so, you know, if that's something that's not an auditable unit going forward, we can, but that was something that was on our auditable units. And that was really a benchmark on compliance, so that we don't have to go and audit compliance. We don't have to put audit compliance.
You might pick up some of it in the ethics and
Yes, just some of
conflict of
it,
interest.
yeah, some of it, yeah. So that's kind of how we do the plan. So based upon that is a plan that's set before you. The items that are in orange are items that were carried over, and we have discussed. The items in yellow indicate things that we'd like to outsource, and the first two we talked about already, which is valuation of investments and initial due diligence. And then the third one is the information technology. Because we already have a preview of the draft report, I'm thinking we're gonna need some consulting in that area. And I don't think we have the in-house resources to provide us with what is going to be needed. So I put time here on the plan for it, but I think it's gonna be an outsourced item. So that's why it's in yellow. So the items in yellow are ones that we will not be doing internally, but would like to outsource. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to kind of look at this. Again, if there are areas, to Sarah's point, that you feel you are comfortable with the risk, even though it's a high, you have the subjectivity to make that decision right now. We scheduled this based upon risk to the organization overall with the risk assessment plan that we did. But you are always, as the audit committee, able to revise and change what's on this plan.
And Monica, just one question. Did you, I know you talked about the Funston report and things that were covered by that. I'm not sure under investment contract management, I know Funston did a lot of work, like they checked over probably 40 different contracts and made sure each and every one had all, I mean, they just did this and the results were positive. So I don't know if you were aware of that or.
I talked with Betsy about it. She said that there was some work that and this is more around setting standards for contracts and standard requirements and stuff. She said that you guys hadn't had an opportunity to really digest and work with what Funston wanted. So I put it back on our plan, just to make sure that it get addressed from a consultant perspective. If there's no need for it, if you guys determine once you have the time to go through and do what you needed to do in that regard, then we can definitely take it off. But I thought it was it came out as a high on our plan, so it wasn't adequately addressed by Funston according to my discussion with Betsy for what we were looking for was standardization, some standards of policies or not policies, of contractual terms and things that could be utilized on that. I think that's what this is. So I just want to make sure.
Yeah, we can take this up a little bit more in executive session too.
Okay, I just.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why it's still on here. But I did have a discussion with Betsy about what occurred for Funston.
So we have a proposal on the plan. I mean, my only comment on it, and we do have the new executive director. I mean, you might want to see if there's a way to shave some extra hours for management time this first go around. Would be
We can, but as you see, let me draw you to the last page. This last page is important. It's called resources.
Right.
This plan year, we are, as a department, we have one FTE, which is me. We didn't have the support because management thankfully has budgeted for some hours on us on a temporary employee side as well as a contract services side to augment the resources that we need. So we do have some time, some dollars associated in the budget for that. So we would definitely work with managers to do that, but understand we do have some resource constraints, and management's budget constraints are real. They're real. So it's, I doubt if I can go back and ask for more money. In fact, I think they're asking me to try to give some back, right?
Well, I think I'm asking every department what
That's
they
exactly
can give
right.
back. We're looking at travel and legal costs and, things like that, trying to see if we can, where we can shave anything. That
Absolutely. And we want to be a team player in that regard. So that's a consideration as well.
All right. So we have a proposal. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second? Discussion? Hearing none. In favor?
Aye.
Adopting this as the current plan? Aye. All right. Audit committee self-evaluation. We just got this form out. It has been sent to Travis. Obviously, this is another one we don't expect your response on. Ed, if you can fill it out at your leisure, I didn't expect you to have it
I don't know
done
if Travis
today.
got it.
Kinda like-
Yeah.
Let me say, I don't know if Travis got it because I wasn't aware. He apparently, the 29th really wasn't his true date. I guess it was 2 weeks beforehand.
Right.
So I sent it to him, but I'm not sure if he actually got it because it went to a Kiva email address.
He was out the last week, on
Yeah.
Right, but he's over at the Department of Revenue, he hadn't left government, so presumably we could track
So we'll
it down
try
and
to
get
track
him
him down
to
and
complete
get
it,
him
right?
completed. Okay. Okay.
Do the best you can on
Okay.
getting his response,
Okay.
that's
So
mine.
this is yours?
And then
Okay.
Ed, if you'll just get it completed
Yeah, no.
at your leisure, we'll compile the results and bring them back to the rest of the committee.
Me.
Monica.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next items, the executive session, do I have a motion? Going, so move, second, all in favor? Aye. All right, we will invite to stay.
I have for you.
Yeah,
Here we go.
thank you.
And Alan, could you announce the
Yeah, the
basis
bases for
which
going-
you're
Yeah, so the basis is pursuant to,
It's right there on that, in front of you.
okay, to discuss personnel matters pursuant to South Carolina Code, Section 30-4-70A1, investments and other financial matters, and investments and other financial matters pursuant to SC Code, Section 9-16-80 and 9-16-320, and receive legal advice from legal counsel pursuant to SC Code, Section 30-470A2.
Thank you.
So with that, I will invite to stay, obviously, Andrew and Monica, legal, Sarah. Anybody else need to stay for that first part? And then we will be inviting back in Mr. Farmer when we get to the section related to HR.